I don't want to misspeak. I will say that doing caucus work, supporting whether it's Republicans or Democrats, there are a lot of folks that are paid retainer or what have you that support everyone. And so I guess I would just ask the question. It doesn't appear on everyone's campaign finance report, so I don't think it's fair to single out this particular individual.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
I have a redirect. I thought it's a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Hicks.
I thought that was a very interesting question because the question comes, your time. And I think I know the answer, but I just want to be clear. How was it rebilled or in kind to clients?
I don't know. That was my department.
You just testified that lots of times there's people working on campaigns in the kind of the manner you were, and they don't show up on all the reports. I think that was, they don't show up on people's reports. Was that you stand by that statement?
I would say throughout the course of time. Yes,
Okay.
it is not particular to one
So-
individual or one campaign.
So if I characterize that what we're talking about here is this case where people who are endorsed either by the speaker or the ORP end up getting a bunch of compensated time spent on their campaigns that in many cases never shows up on any campaign report. Wouldn't that be consistent with what you just said is, so a lot of times there's people that are getting
I
paid that are
certainly don't want
working.
to speak on behalf of those organizations now.
Well, did you provide any by candidate billing to anybody?
As I testified on numerous occasions, I'm not doing billing.
Okay, did anybody ask you for an allocation of your time as to how it should be divided between candidates for which you were doing work for?
Not that I recall.
Did you ever provide any in-kind information to any candidate of what they should show as an in-kind on a report based on your compensation for working on their campaigns?
Not that I recall.
I'm just gonna place an objection. I just think it's irrelevant. We've certainly gone past the parameters of Mr. Hicks's complaint, but
I think my complaint is whether the report was complete and accurate and whether expenses or in-kinds that took place were reflected or not. So I think we've just had the witness testify that she's not aware of her time being rebilled or showing on a campaign finance report, which I think is extremely relevant to the direct allegation of the campaign finance reports were not complete or accurate, specific to the activities around radio and mailers.
Any other questions from commissioners? Not. You can leave the witness seat at this point.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Mr. Hicks?
So I'm just gonna ask now, I'd like to call Nelson Embry.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
If I may.
Yes.
We've been going a little over 2 hours. Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, we can. We can do a 5-minute, 10-minute? Okay, we'll do a 10-minute break. And we'll resume.
Thank you.
actually, when we come back, can I just raise one quick issue? Just a housekeeping issue. We want me to raise it now? Would I be, I've got a little bit of a time constraint this afternoon.
Yeah,
Would I be,
got a couple members that do too.
okay,
What's our heart out?
yeah, because
I have to be out at 2:30.
2:30, okay.
Before that, so you might take over. I've got a 2:30
Okay,
and I could get there in probably 15 minutes,
okay, so we need to leave at 2?
between 2 and 2:15.
And can I just procedurally, do we know if Scott Schweitzer's here? I haven't seen him.
I do not know.
He was the subpoenaed witness,
Officially on break.
Yeah, we are on break.
because I would get him out of the way if he's here.
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
When you say you have to leave, does that mean the hearing's over or?
Yes.
Because
For today.
then we have another person that has to leave at 2:30. So between 2:15 and 2:30, we have two commissioners.
Well, is it, I mean, since we have to reconvene, would it make sense to big stop now and then figure out another date?
I'd rather get the testimony out of the way as much as we can.
Yeah.
But if
If
your
you've got
parties
somebody to
are
provide
here-
testimony, we
What
probably
they
ought to
find
get as
out.
much of it.
Yeah, no, that's, so,
While we're here.
yeah, you wanna,
Here?
Could we
I
maybe?
don't know, not that I'm aware. I haven't seen him, but it's certainly.
Let's try to figure that out.
Yeah, if you guys could figure that out while we take.
But I think regardless, it's maybe potentially good till 2. It sounds like is.
Chris, how many witnesses do you have?
Let's take a 10-minute break.
Scott
We'll be back.
Schweitzer, David Goldstein. Huh?
Not here.
He's gonna be here next meeting.
Hey,
Scott Schweitzer, and I'm gonna credit call Nelson Emery because I think the
we're not gonna
person,
be here.
well, then he needs to be here next time.
Speaking.
He was the treasurer. The treasurer is the one who has the obligations per the statute. So he's the one, he's named in the complaint. He can take the 5th. I guess he could take the 5th.
That's there in just a second. Is there a close place to get a water? Can we have a water or anything in here? Is that all right?
Fine.
Is there a vending machine place here, the other floor?
There used to be right where we are, but,
But now it's this room. No.
yeah, basically, there used to be a little cafe here years and years and years ago. But if you go out this main area, don't go into the tunnel, but you go through kind of the revolving doors. There might be a little kind of shop there on the right-hand side. Sorry, I haven't served down here
No,
in
that's
years
okay.
consistently, but
Oh,
I know if you go through, you can get to Einstein's and the road, or not the roads, what's this name of the building? But there is activity
Okay.
close. But,
Not venturing more than.
yeah, that's probably right.
That's why it's getting lost. I was gonna say.
I know, I was like, "Eesh."
Yeah.
Somebody's email's up on the screen. Might not want it to be up on the screen. Here, let's scan it and see if there's anything scintillating.
That's hi, Philip. Yeah, I don't know why he has this computer open this whole time. It's just,
We've had the exhibits side by side up there, so that's not.
Peter, do you want to be like my witness that we're just shutting this. So,
You're sending some emails out under his email.
hey, Phil, do you need to minimize your screen so everybody can't see inside your email? Because you're giving a show to everybody the whole day.
Doesn't look like there's anything shocking in there.
Personal or,
Sending stuff like during the
I was
hearing.
gonna help you out. but
Popping
I
up.
don't want to touch your stuff. It's like.
Well, hold
air.
on a second.
You don't.
I think what she said, when she rolled over, there, she was gonna send out a few emails on your behalf.
Could be.
Then you
yeah.
walked in and then she had this.
Yeah.
Why not? I do not see Mr. Schweitzer, so it would appear he's not here.
I just tried to call him, I'm on text. He could be theoretically on the 19th floor or something.
Awesome, sir.
Do you have what's Ron O'Brien's number? I don't have his direct number, but you probably do, and that's, he's his lawyer. You know what that, sound like we're working in some mining work or something? Yes. For I was gonna say, for such a nice room, it's a highly distracting feature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Stewart's. Mr. Stewart is.
Mr. Hicks, you are on.
So if Mr. Embry's not here and Mr. Schweitzer is not here, then whatever we want to do is fine by me. But for lack of either of them being here, then I would call Miss Cardelloni. I guess what I'm saying to you guys is, since he mentioned, do we want to just stop here? That kind of thing is, we can either stop or doesn't matter to me, but if we want to go till 2, I'll call her.
Let me just ask about Mr. Caraway. Do you plan on calling him? Not necessarily.
Not today, I don't think, unless if we're going to end at 2:30. Tell him I'm sorry.
You have
Wait
a,
on the hallway.
why can't you take him after her?
I think we're going to run out of time.
He has an emergency. He really needs to go.
Is that Caraway?
Yeah. The witness has to be sworn in.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Cardelloni. Am I saying it right? Cardelloni? So if I butcher it at some point, I'll apologize in advance. So you are the current treasurer for Friends of Brian Stewart?
I am.
And when did you become the treasurer?
January 2022.
January of 2022. Was that before or after my complaints were filed? Well, I filed one on March 4th, 2022. And then the other one was June 2022. So that would mean you were the treasurer prior to me filing. I don't know that it matters. I'm just trying, so then if you were treasurer and then I filed my reports, did you receive a copy of my complaints? Did you receive copies of my complaints from the commission at the time I filed them? Okay. And when you received them, what actions did you take as the current treasurer of Friends of Brian Stewart?
I had a conversation with Brian.
Okay, as the current treasurer, is there any other actions that you took?
No.
Did you attempt to contact Mr. Goldstein?
I did not. I had conversations with Brian, with my boss, Natalie Bauer, and consulted. That was it.
So when you say your boss, Natalie Bauer, can you explain what you mean by your boss, Natalie Bauer, as a campaign treasurer?
Yeah, I work for a firm, NK Bauer and Associates.
Okay.
She is the owner and president of that company. For the past 24 years, I've worked for her for the past 12.
Okay. Are you serve as treasurer for other candidates as well?
Brian's campaign is the only one that I am officially listed as the treasurer.
Does the firm that you're part of, do you say Bauer? I don't want to say the name wrong, but
NK Bauer.
does it have other candidate clients?
We have several, yes.
Okay, so that's one of the lines of service that your firm offers.
Correct.
But you're exclusive to Brian Stewart, at least as far, do you do other work for that firm? Yes.
I do.
Are you a CPA?
I'm not.
Okay, prior to being the campaign treasurer for Brian Stewart, do you have any other experience with being a campaign treasurer?
Not. I've experience doing campaign treasurer work.
Okay, helping with getting reports assembled and things like that. Okay. So the only action you took after receiving my complaint, my first complaint, let's break them down. So the first one was in March of 2022, was to talk with Brian Stewart and to talk with your boss. Did you take any steps to try to clarify anything relating to whether the mailers had gone out, which mailers, or any other allegations within the complaint?
That was all talked about in the conversations with Brian, absolutely.
But independent of Brian, did you, as the campaign treasurer under statute, take any steps other than talking to the candidate himself to verify, investigate, or understand the nature of the mailers, for example, or the radio ad?
Go ahead.
In terms of verifying whether or not the mailers went out, I think would be impossible. So that's not something I necessarily investigated. Just from working on campaigns and understanding how they operate, it's not really a great way to do that, to be honest, because like we've discussed, so many are produced and the candidate really doesn't often know what actually goes out. So I don't know how I would go about doing that.
Well, we came up earlier talking about the permits shown on the mailers. So did you make any attempt to identify who owned the permits, or what was the mail house that it's done a mailing, if a mailing took place?
I don't think that shows that a mailing actually went out.
I didn't ask you whether it showed if a mailing went out. I asked you if you took any
Well, you
steps.
did. You asked me if I verified it, whether or not a mailing went out.
I asked you if you verified who owned that permit.
I did not.
Okay. Did you make any attempt to verify who owned that permit?
I did not.
Did you identify, are you aware that permits align to, such as that align to specific post offices?
Yeah.
Are you aware that you can go to the post offices and they can give you reporting of what went out under that permit number? Okay. Well, now I guess you are. On the radio ad, did you make any attempt to contact anybody from strategy and media? Have you met Megan Fitzmartin prior to today? Did you make any attempt to contact anybody from Constant Content? Okay, why not?
I think because I was not the treasurer at the time that all of this happened. I know that I was listed as the treasurer and am the current treasurer. But that's the reason. There wasn't really anything for me to do when my client is telling me that he's disputing a bill. There's not further action that I'm gonna take until that decision has been made. I'm not going to take action to amend a report or any of the other things.
So do you know, as treasurer, do you have an understanding that you're legally liable for the accuracy of the report?
I do.
It's just a simple statement.
So, do you know whether, I just had an idea. No, do you know whether and I don't know the answer, so I want to ask you, and you're in a company that does this kind of work. Do you know if a treasurer that takes the place of another treasurer has any liability to reports filed by the prior treasurer? Or to correct them if they become aware of issues?
There's a liability to file accurate reports.
But my question specifically, and it's okay if you don't know the answer, because I don't know the answer. Do you know if that liability to correct prior reports of a prior treasurer bestows upon a current treasurer?
I'm gonna object. This is a hypothetical on top of a hypothetical. You just admitted that that's not what the law is.
Not sure.
I didn't admit anything about the law. I asked her.
You said you don't
I'm sure I understand the question, honestly. It's, the duty is to file accurate reports. If that includes an amendment, then yes, but aside from that, I'm not
So-
sure I understand.
Is it your understanding that if you become aware of an issue with a report filed under a previous treasurer, that you as the current treasurer have an obligation to make the correction to the prior report?
Yes.
Okay. The, did you do any investigation into the radio ad?
In what way? Investigate how?
Whether it
I
ran, go to the
discussed
FCC database and pull down the invoices yourself? Did you make any attempt to verify that?
You could. I
Okay.
don't work in media. Don't often search that information.
Were you, and I apologize if I asked this, correct me, but I apologize if I did. Do you have any, knowledge of any relationships with anybody that works at, or know anybody that works at Strategy Group for Media or Strategic Media Placement?
What do you mean by no?
No.
Like, do I know their names? Do I know them?
Let's start with, you've had any conversations with them on any
No.
topic? So you've never had any
I don't. Not that I can recall.
with anybody from Strategic Media?
Aside from potentially a question about an invoice for a client, but no, I don't know deeply anyone at Strategic Media Placement.
Have you worked with the Ohio Republican Party relating to the reporting of in-kinds?
I've received notices from the Ohio Republican Party of in-kinds and have then reported them. Aside from that, I haven't really worked with anyone from there.
Okay, so you don't have any personal connection or have ever had any discussions of anybody from Ohio Republican Party? relating to in-kinds?
Well, one piece of my job is also fundraising, so I guess I have had discussions with the ORP about in-kinds in my career, but not specific to Brian Stewart and definitely not specific to the state. I think. It's a kind of broad question.
Okay, I want to direct you to look at in my exhibits, it's going to be page number. It's gonna, actually, I'll look at it from his. I want to look at it where they're all listed. I can give you a page number, but I think I'm going to refer to other pages right after that one. So I'm going to get it where they're all together. F, so it's exhibit F in my set of materials, and the page number at the bottom says 54. And then I'm going to have you go forward 2 pages to page 56. Have you ever seen that invoice before?
Just in the documents for this case,
In which documents?
the complaint.
Okay. And you see that the second line on that invoice says radio production Stewart, $1,100.
I do.
Okay. Were you aware that Mr. Stewart turned over to me a media file of that radio ad?
I was aware that he turned over everything that was produced for his campaign as requested.
Are you now aware that there was in fact a radio ad and he provided a copy of it to me?
I was aware then, I'm aware now, yes.
So I was confused by your prior answer, made it sound like you weren't aware, but you were aware that he gave me everything.
I was
Were
aware.
you specifically aware of a audio radio ad? And when did you become aware of that radio ad?
I do not recall when, but I was aware, yeah.
But prior to this hearing?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you see that line that says $1,100.
Mhm.
You would confirm that the radio ad does exist and somebody made the radio ad?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not even going to get into the radio ad airing or not. So at the time that you became aware that the radio ad did exist and that there was a bill for $1,100 for that radio ad's production, why didn't you amend a campaign finance report to show that as either an in-kind contribution or in some appropriate way?
I mean, I think there's 2 reasons. One would be the bill is to constant content. So that would be the first reason that I would not amend the report. But more importantly, I knew that this bill was being disputed by my client. So if my client is disputing a bill, I'm not going to amend and report it as dead.
Okay, so how is this bill being disputed by your client?
Well, I mean, he is disputing it, right? The first.
I thought his actual disputing was on the print side of it and the mailer side of it with Mr. Goldstein. I'm not aware of a specific dispute that your client has represented about the radio ad.
Gonna object, that's why we're sitting here.
Yeah, I'm confused by that. I'm sorry.
Okay. So you didn't, so the reason why you didn't take any action with this is because your client told you they were disputing the $1,100 charge for production of a radio ad that the client had and gave me a copy of.
And no, they were refusing that the ad ever ran and that they ever received a bill from Constant Content.
But again, I'm directing you to line 2, the production cost of the ad, not the placement cost of the ad.
To me, it's one bill. I guess that's how I would respond.
Do you think that if a radio ad is produced as a campaign treasurer in a firm that does campaign treasurer work, if a radio ad is produced. The candidate participates in the production of the radio ad. You become aware of a cost associated with that. That as a treasurer, you have any obligation at all?
I think that you're not always billed for the production of a radio ad if it hasn't run, and Brian, as he said, there's no proof, there's no bill, so I wouldn't amend a report to report one.
What, let's say that I had volunteered for the campaign and spent a lot of time, and somebody, you find out after the fact, somebody actually paid me to do that volunteer work for, let's say, $1,100. Do you feel you have any obligation to do anything then?
Was it approved by the campaign?
I want you to answer my question. And if there's different scenarios in which you would behave differently, then lay out the scenarios.
Can you?
Well, I'm gonna object. I mean, she can ask for clarification. She can,
Yeah, repeat your question and we'll go on from there.
If I volunteered for, if you thought I had been volunteering for the campaign, and then later,
Who am I?
the treasurer,
Okay,
okay? And you later found out that in reality, I was paid to work on the campaign by a third party. And let's pretend I was paid $1,100 for, say, going door to door. You thought at the time I was a volunteer, which then there's nothing reportable, but later you find I was actually compensated by a third party for doing that. Do you feel that you have any obligation then?
not if I didn't give authorization for you to do that. It would be an independent expenditure in that case.
Okay, so let's say that the candidate was aware that there was compensated work happening. Then do you have an obligation?
Yes, I suppose you do in that case.
Did Mr.
But it
Stewart,
would also be necessary for the candidate to know that that work happened. There would have to be a letter of provided to the campaign for in-kind work done. I mean, you can't just assume someone knows something.
Well, wouldn't
There's
I-
not anything there, especially for a treasurer who has to, I mean, I can't just file things based on someone's word. I have to see it. I have to get approval for it. It has to be accurate. There has to be checks and balances in place. Otherwise, anyone could just submit something to the campaign and you file it. I mean,
but there would be a difference, would you agree there would be a difference between I just randomly made up some bill and sent it to the campaign? And I sent a bill to the campaign, or I sent a bill to a third party who paid it on behalf of the campaign. Where the candidate participated in the activities, that would imply they knew and approved of the activities?
I think that's fair, but in the scenario that you're providing, there was a bill. Like something was sent to the campaign, which I think is the whole argument here. Brian didn't receive a bill from Constant Content. There's this, but it's not a bill to Friends of Brian Stewart. So from my perspective,
So if nobody sends a bill, if I'm a candidate and somebody does a bunch of work for me where everybody's getting paid, but they never send me a bill, I don't have to report anything?
can you repeat that? Sorry.
If a bunch of work is happening for my campaign and I know it's happening and the people are being compensated, if they never send me a bill, then I have no obligation to report anything?
I think there is a scenario, yes, where that would happen, which I think is what Megan's scenario is. She's being paid a retainer by a company. She's doing work for a ton of different candidates. You don't really, like, the client doesn't necessarily know exactly what every person, Majority Strategies or whoever is paying to do that work. It's not reported, which I think Mr. Knight asked that question, like you're doing work for specific candidates, is that not reported on campaign finance reports? And the answer is no. She's being paid a retainer by a company. She's doing work for the candidate, but the only thing that's gonna show is the candidate paying that company that's paying for the retainer. That's just reality.
Well, the candidate here didn't pay any company. Right?
Candidate here didn't receive an invoice.
He received a notice of collection from a place, and then as part of these complaints, he received copies of invoices that have been paid by a third party, didn't he?
He did, but I don't think that that implicates that he owes Constant Content anything without approval to move forward with the work that they provided for him with no contract provided.
In effect, is your testimony that the idea that there are consultants that are being paid that are working on campaigns, whatever, that they don't, that's normal to have that happen compensated and not show up on any campaign finance report? Because somebody says they can't figure out who's responsible for what part of the money.
No, I'm just trying to drive the point home that there's a lot of work that's done on campaigns that isn't necessarily reportable because other companies are paying people to do that work.
By definition, work being paid for by another company for somebody to do work for a campaign is legally required to be reported. And if the company,
Independent expenses, like independent people working for that.
we're not
company.
talking about, just to clarify, an independent expense where the candidate had no involvement whatsoever. Wouldn't even have, we're talking about things where the candidate was in possession of copies of mailers. They did voiceover for a radio ad. It was not independent. It was something where the candidate was directly participating in. But I want to get clarification on your statement that, you can't figure out there's other people paying for people to work on campaigns. And that either, I don't know what, you can clarify the statement, doesn't get reported. I think that's,
I'm just
you
saying-
just described something that's not legal.
No, I'm just trying to explain, maybe poorly, but there's work that's done on a campaign. There's stuff that is produced for a campaign that, like we said before, never goes out and isn't seen by anyone. So it's not, everything you do for a campaign isn't going to be reported. Because it may have been produced for the campaign, but they never charged the client, they never sent an invoice, and so it didn't get reported. That's all.
But
I'm
do you,
saying.
I just want to clarify your understanding. It's my understanding that if I got compensated for doing that work, that has to be reported.
Yeah.
It's not a volunteer activity. It's a compensated activity.
Yeah, I think we're misunderstanding each other.
Well, what am I misunderstanding?
Just the,
I'm
Yeah,
gonna object. We're
yeah,
so
this
far
is-
afield of the actual allegations of the complaint. We're now micromanaging what Megan Fitzmartin did or didn't do in a separate entity. She's not even a party.
I think that in prior cases, one of the key points has been, did people show proper diligence? Did they do what a reasonable person would have done when confronted with the information in the complaint? Or did they not do what a reasonable person would do? In fact, that was cited in one of your findings. Is what a reasonable person would have done. Did they show proper due diligence? I'm getting at trying to explore with the treasurer that inherited this. Prior to the complaints being filed, did she have reasonable diligence? And because of the way she's responded, I feel it's appropriate to clarify her understanding of campaign finance laws.
Continue.
So, and I don't, did you make any attempt to contact any of the radio stations? Were there people other than this that were doing compensated work that had some potential benefit to the campaign, whether it was used or not, potentially, that you were aware of?
I was not even part of this campaign at that time.
Okay. Do you think that it's normal that there's compensated work for campaigns that never gets reported on any campaign finance reports?
And that's where I think the misunderstanding was. No, I guess to answer that question directly, no.
So did you ever inquire with Megan Fitzmartin what should be reported for her?
No, I've never talked to her in my life.
Will you after this? Why not?
I don't have a reason to.
Well, isn't it a reason that she testified that she was being compensated to do work that was related to the campaign and it wasn't reported anywhere because nobody asked her? Wouldn't diligence the treasurer say that now you should go ask her, what should I report?
My understanding is that is not how it works. Like, that is not how the law is written, that we have to report every single thing that someone on a retainer for a company does for a campaign.
Is your firm CPA oriented or not? Okay. Do you do timesheets for how you spend your time? Are you familiar with industries like consulting and CPA firms and lawyers that every day they do timesheets, a lot of times down to 15-minute increments of what they're working on? Are you familiar with that concept?
Not really.
You're not familiar with that concept.
No, not really.
Have you ever hired an attorney?
Our firm has an attorney. I have not personally ever hired.
So you've never hired, okay, so you're not familiar with the concept of somebody keeping their time so they can report it
I
for
am,
proper.
yes.
So you are,
I think I misunderstood your original question.
okay, so that's good, because but you're aware of people like accountants, consultants, lawyers,
Charging.
usually have to track. When I was a consultant for Accenture, I had to track my time every minute of the day, every day, so that it could be properly billed and allocated to clients. And I got yelled at if not enough of my time was properly billed and allocated to clients, because that's how we made money. So you're familiar with that concept, but you don't do it in your firm.
We do not.
Are you compensated for being a treasurer for campaigns?
I think we're going way off the reservation, but
Not necessarily. I mean, it is getting a little bit far afield from where we are on the issues that are pending before us. Let's get back to that.
Okay, but let me just, and I'll move on from this question. But are you compensated to be the treasurer for Friends of Brian Stewart?
I get a salary from NK Bauer and Associates.
Okay. And how are you reflected on their campaign finance reports? I think the answer is easy. I think you probably are.
What do you mean?
How are you reflected on Friends of Brian Stewart's campaign finance reports?
NK Bauer and Associates.
Because they sent them an invoice, correct?
Correct.
If you were compensated by them, but not, would you have an obligation if your firm decided we're not going to charge the candidates for doing this, that there would still be some reporting by the candidate?
Can you repeat that?
So let's say that you decided you were getting compensated, but you were doing work for a candidate that your firm didn't bill. And you're being paid to do the
That would
work.
be an
Do you-
in-kind contribution.
So that would be an in-kind, and it should show on their campaign finance report.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I have no further questions at this time.
how are you, Emily?
Doing okay.
So you became treasurer for Friends of Brian Stewart, I think in 2022, correct?
Correct.
All right, so it's like a year and a half after these activities, is that right?
That's right.
All right, and you knew that Friends of Brian Stewart is disputing these claims.
Correct.
All right, so I assume you were not looking for extra work in the sense that you knew that they were disputing these claims. So as a result of that, you were not going to spend substantial amounts of time investigating something that you were not directly involved with that's being disputed. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And then how long have you worked at NK Bauer?
12 years.
And how long has that firm been in business?
24.
And how many candidates do you work with?
We have 14 state and federal candidates. We file reports for about 30 federal, state campaigns, PACs, and joint fundraising committees.
Okay. And I assume you handle compliance with campaign finance laws?
Yes.
And then you're familiar with that, I assume?
Yeah.
Okay. And when did you started, do you remember when in 2022 you started working with Brian Stewart?
I believe we sent in the designation of treasurer in January.
Okay, so obviously you had nothing to do with the 2020 reports, correct?
Correct.
And have you since reviewed the reports?
I have.
And are you generally familiar with them? Okay. And do you recall Brian Stewart contacting your firm to discuss the constant content demand letter from Attorney Goldstein?
I do.
All right. And did you discuss the issue of Mr. Hicks alleging that a radio ad should have been reported as an in-kind contribution?
Mhm.
And then you were aware of discussions between Friends of Brian Stewart, Natalie Bauer, and Attorney Don Bray, is that right?
I was, yes.
All right. And did Friends of Brian Stewart seek guidance about whether any amendments to the 2020 reports were necessary?
He did.
All right. And is it your recollection that your firm, Attorney Don Bray, both believe that amendments would be improper?
Correct.
And why is that?
We concluded after those conversations that as a treasurer with no bill in front of us to Friends of Brian Stewart, and then an active case here that bill is being disputed, that if we were to amend the prior reports, they would be inaccurate. That if we were to amend it and say it was an outstanding debt that our client is telling us that he doesn't owe and that we're not visibly seeing, no one's able to produce the invoice for us, we concluded it would be inaccurate to file those amendments.
Okay. So as a treasurer, you don't automatically pay every demand for payment, even if you believe the demand's illegitimate, correct?
Correct.
So like if my law firm sends you a bill for $27,000, you're not just gonna pay it because I say it's legitimate, right?
That's right.
And in the case of Friends of Brian Stewart, were you aware that Constant Content failed to produce any contract or proof of the amount being demanded?
Correct.
Okay. And did you or Friends of Brian Stewart ever receive an invoice from Constant Content or David Goldstein demanding $13,000?
No.
Did you or Friends of Brian Stewart ever receive a notice indicating that an in-kind expenditure for a radio ad was made on behalf of Friends of Brian Stewart?
No.
And as a treasurer, can you pay money from an account without receiving an invoice?
No, the only scenario I can think of would be a contribution refund, not an invoice, no.
Even then, there's gonna be a paper trail, correct?
Correct.
There's gonna be something substantiating that, is that
Correct.
correct? All right. And as a treasurer, are you required to list as a debt disputed invoices that you believe are fraudulent?
No.
Do you believe do you believe the 2020 campaign finance reports are accurate?
I do.
Do you believe they need to be amended simply because of this complaint?
I do not.
And did the Ohio Secretary of State's office ever flag these reports and indicate they believe that there were inaccuracies?
They have not.
Okay. So from the time you took over through today, you believe everything was done appropriately, is that correct?
Correct.
And no outside body has said otherwise, correct?
Correct.
And just because we're sitting here today, that doesn't necessarily mean that anything has to be amended, correct?
Correct.
And obviously, sitting here, you don't have any personal knowledge regarding anything that happened in 2019, 2020, in terms of what was approved, what was a draft, what was related to being endorsed, nothing, correct?
Zero knowledge.
And you understand that there are, for lack of a better phrase, there's multiple layers to these issues when a candidate is endorsed in terms of who pays for what, who accounts for what, and so forth, that if you're endorsed by the party, that's a whole layer of payments and issues in terms of what they pay for, what's classified as an in-kind, what could be a volunteer versus what the campaign itself does. There's a few layers to that, right?
Very multifaceted, yes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I just want to redirect on a few things that he brought up. And I just want to clarify this. There was some representation made about engaging. I want to let you clarify it, so I don't want to put words in your mouth. Goldstein relating to his collections, demand for collections. Were you involved in any way with those demands for collection or responding to them?
I was not.
Okay, well, and I just want to clarify because it would have been confusing if you were, because that happened prior to you being the treasurer. So, yeah, so just so everybody on the commission's clear that those events were in August and September of 2021. You didn't become the treasurer till January 2022. You said Don Bray was giving advice. What's Don Bray's role in all of this?
He's an attorney, I'll defer to them. Who is Don Bray an attorney for, Brian? And then,
At the time, he was the attorney for the Republican caucus.
Okay.
But he's not your attorney.
he's not.
Okay. Were you aware that the advice that it sounds like you were getting from Don Bray involved the matter in which Don Bray was the lawyer and where now has been through all levels of the court system? In which he made those arguments that you know, you don't have to report stuff unless you have an invoice and so on and so forth?
I think you're implying that they may know something. I'm not sure. Can you rephrase or repeat?
Are you aware at all of what transpired in the Alan Freeman case here? Where Don Bray was the attorney, which I think is a fair question because Don Bray is appearing to be involved in this matter in some way.
No,
Okay, so you have no knowledge of the Alan Freeman matter or Don Bray's role
I
in it.
mean,
And Don Bray is not your attorney, nor is he the attorney of your company.
Correct.
Okay, and you, there was a term used by referring to a fraudulent invoice. Was it part of the question that was asked to you? And I don't remember the exact question. But at this juncture, do you think that the $1,100 that Strategy and Media says it costs to produce the radio ad is a fraudulent invoice?
I don't,
She can answer it just.
I don't know that it's my role to determine if the invoice is fraudulent.
Well, if you're the treasurer, I guess I'm confused. I believe that the,
The invoice, though,
Statutes,
if
but-
I'm not the treasurer.
Sorry,
I'm
I'm
the
sorry.
content.
I'm asking a question, okay? So I believe that the statutes put the treasurer in the top spot in terms of their responsibility to the reports. In
just-
fact, isn't it the treasurer that signs on the reports that are submitted, not the candidate?
I'm aware. I'm just saying this invoice is not to Friends of Brian Stewart. So I don't know that I would be the one to determine whether or not it's quote fraudulent.
Okay, so you can't make any representation as to any of these invoices being in any way fraudulent.
I'm just referring to,
Are you
I
making a
haven't seen
representation that it's fraudulent?
sorry,
Are you making a representation that it's fraudulent?
I'm not, no.
Okay, so I just want to clear that up because I don't believe you would have any basis to know
That's
that
exactly-
claim, make that claim. So I appreciate you clearing that up. But at this point, particularly that line of $1,100 for the production of a radio ad, however long it was, 30 seconds or 45 a minute, whatever it was that I played, I can't remember. You would admit that the radio ad exists at this point?
Does exist, yes.
Would you admit at this point that the radio ad did in fact air?
No, I have no idea if the radio had aired.
So you believe that potentially the line on that invoice for airtime in the FCC database invoices, they could be fraudulent? I'm not asking you to say whether Brian Stewart authorized it. I'm just asking, are you willing to concede at this point that the radio ad did in fact run?
I think you've shown that it ran. You downloaded the FCC or FFC or whatever it is that shows that it ran.
So you would at this point accept that the radio ad did run?
Yeah.
You would accept that the radio ad it does exist?
Yeah.
You would accept that Brian Stewart's voiceover is part of the radio ad?
It appears that way. Yes.
But you have never made any attempts to contact Strategy and Media or anybody else to make sure that the dollar amounts that are on the invoice that they sent to Constant Content are correct, reasonable, and then take any step to report an in-kind contribution or otherwise relating to that?
I have not contacted the strategy group, no.
So at what point do you think that you would have an obligation as treasurer to contact somebody?
I think when it is clear that a bill is to my client. Like this bill is from Constant Content or to Constant Content. So when my client is telling me that he's disputing it, that he never received the bill from Constant Content for his committee to pay, then that's why
you keep referring to Mr. Stewart as your client, and I understand that context in the firm that you operate in, but you're the treasurer.
Mhm.
And I don't think the statutes have a client relationship between the candidate and treasurer where it directs the treasurer to only do what the client tells them to do or anything like that. The treasurer has an obligation.
Yeah.
In that mix. And at this point, you have already agreed that the radio ad exists, that the radio ad ran, that Mr. Stewart's voiceover is in the radio ad. You've been treasurer since January of 2022. And at this point, even today, your testimony is there's nothing required on your part relating to any campaign finance reporting. Is that your testimony?
I think that, yeah, that is my testimony, yeah.
So when would there be anything that you would have to do?
I think that there has to be a burden of proof that my client owes the money that's on this invoice.
An in-kind contribution has nothing to do with somebody owing the money.
There was no indication of an in-kind. Couldn't this technically be an independent expenditure? I mean, there's
Not
no,
when they-
Constant Content has not issued an in-kind to Brian Stewart saying that that's the case.
It's not an independent expenditure when the candidate was part of creating the ad. That would be the opposite of an independent expenditure.
I guess when I am looking at this as a treasurer, usually production and airtime is kind of looped in to one thing, one invoice for an ad that ran. Because it could have been produced and never run, and typically a client wouldn't be invoiced for that. So that's just my experience. I mean, it's up to the commission to determine if that's incorrect, but that is my experience.
But is it also your experience that if somebody is compensated for that work, that there's an obligation that be shown on a campaign finance report as an in-kind contribution?
Can you repeat that?
If somebody is compensated for the work,
So,
even if the candidate's not paying for it, if the person doing the work is compensated, isn't that the definition of what needs to be appear as an in-kind contribution? When it's done with the candidate's knowledge? Such as making the radio ad? I'm not disputing the airtime. That's a separate discussion, but the making the ad, when you're in the ad, isn't that the definition of what needs to be reported as an in-kind?
I think that can be a little convoluted because something can be produced and never run, and then somebody may never bill the client for that.
It's an in-kind. You don't get a bill for an in-kind.
Because Constant Content paid for it, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. A third party paid for it. Are you aware of the difference between the ramifications of a third party who is an individual or an LLC that's treated as an individual versus a corporation doing that?
I am. I'm aware that you cannot accept contributions from a corporation. Yes.
Is that any kind of, is that only cash contributions or is that cash or in-kind contributions?
Both.
Both. So if in fact the radio ad, just the production that Brian Stewart himself personally participated in was paid for, the production was paid for by a corporation, Constant Content, shouldn't, as a treasurer, that raise all kind of alarm bells in your mind?
I guess I'm getting hung up on the fact that because there is no bill to Friends of Brian Stewart and no proof that the ad ran, that he doesn't necessarily get billed for the production of the ad.
There's proofs that the ad ran, right? We agreed the ad ran.
Sorry, yes. Proof that he approved the ad running.
Well, I've focused my questions very precisely on the production. And I would assume that since his voice is in the production, he was aware of the production. So let me ask it, my, hopefully close to the last question. You were not the treasurer when this stuff happened.
Correct.
You've talked about what you've done as the treasurer after it happened. If the same series of events played out today, you became aware of Mr. Stewart participating in the production of an ad and you never saw an invoice or never saw an in-kind, as a treasurer, would you do anything?
That's actually just not something I would most likely become aware
I
of.
said if you were aware of.
In that case, yes. As the sitting treasurer, I would.
So then would you agree that in hindsight, Nelson Embry did it wrong back then?
I can't speak to that. I have no idea what Nelson Embry did or knew about or saw.
So if going forward, if this were happening again, you were aware of it, you would believe something should be reported. Is that a correct statement?
If this were to happen again, I would not report anything until I saw a in-kind letter from Constant Content or which they cannot provide because they're a corporation. So at the end of the day, it would be an invoice from Constant Content for radio production. As the sitting treasurer, I would ask for that.
So is
But
your
I
testimony,
haven't seen that.
so is your testimony that the law in Ohio is that you only have to report an in-kind if somebody sends you a letter?
Well, I mean, I think just realistically, you have to know about it. Otherwise,
Well,
it would be. an
that's a big
independent-
distinction. Okay, so it might be clear and I want to be done. If you know about it, okay? If I had no knowledge, then that's truly an independent expenditure that I had no involvement, no knowledge whatsoever, and I can't be but if I know about it, don't I have an obligation as the treasurer to go ask the people that were involved with it? Hey, where does this show up anywhere? Who made this radio ad for you?
Can you repeat one more time? I was thinking while you were talking.
So if the candidate's aware of the activity and aware of its compensated activity, don't they have some obligation? I'm just focused on the production of the radio ad
Okay.
to go, they can just sit there and say, unless I get an in-kind letter, I never need to report anything. Kind of like, unless I get an invoice, I don't have to report anything.
I think there's just a lot happening during a campaign cycle where he may produce an ad, they're telling him, let's have this in the can, like you said, and he may produce that radio ad and give his voiceover or,
And
take a
I'm
look
not-
at 50 different mailers. And then he may not know if that mail goes out, however it goes. So I don't think he necessarily would go searching for an in-kind letter or actively say,
And I'm not
I know I
disputing,
did
but just
that. So
so I appreciate what you're saying. And I'm not disputing that a lot of shit happens on campaigns. But now I am disputing what happens when for 2 years you've known about it. And so with that, it's just to clarify, my last question is your feeling and your testimony today is there is no need to make any adjustments to any prior campaign finance reports, even to show some in-kind contribution related to the production of the radio ad.
I think because I was not the treasurer at the time, I can't speak to the production of the ad. Like I was
Okay.
not.
I have no further questions for now.
Very, very briefly. So I guess to put a bow on this, in terms of I think part of what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, like if you look at Exhibit 1, the reason you don't feel comfortable you couldn't report this is because Exhibit 1, page 56 of Mr. Hicks's exhibits is an invoice to Constant Content, and there's no paper trail or anything that then connects that to Friends of Brian Stewart, correct?
Correct.
So in other words, for you or any treasurer to properly fill out a report, you've got to have a proper paper trail in some way, shape, or form. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we don't see that here, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then in terms of the mailer and so forth, there was a exhibit 8 to respondents exhibit is the September 5th, 2021 letter from Friends of Brian Stewart to David Goldstein. And you've seen that letter, correct?
Mhm.
And that letter disputes that the invoice from Constant Content related to that mailer. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So, and it's your understanding in terms of, and I think this is where the term fraudulent comes up, is that Mr. Stewart may have mentioned that earlier, that the reason well, there's a couple reasons, but one of the main reasons that invoice kind of raised his attention was because he knows his relationship with Mr. Longstreth. And at that time, Mr. Longstreth had already been indicted on several issues. So not only had his campaign never seen that invoice, but just the fact that Mr. Longstreth,
Speech.
We'll get to a question. Go ahead, finish.
the fact that, so there was really two issues. Number one is he had never even seen the invoice, number one. And then number two, knowing the relationship between Constant Content and Mr. Longstreth, is it your understanding that Mr. Stewart's radar was extra high because of that? And that's where the whole fraudulent, like, this does not seem right to me.
Right.
Is that your understanding?
Yeah.
Is that fair? Nothing further, thanks. Very quick, very quick.
So, but the invoice from Strategy and Media didn't come from Constant Content and didn't come from David Goldstein, correct? It came from me.
The product, like, the.
Yeah, the invoice, he's making representations about what came from David Goldstein and so forth. The invoice that we were just talking about with the production time came from Strategy and Media and me, not from David Goldstein. Correct? Okay.
Anything?
Was there any questions?
Any questions? Next steps.
Well, I think we're at that point where persons are expected to leave. We'll hold off on the rest of the hearing at this point and reschedule it based on what is convenient for everybody. As best we can. I guess that's where we are at this point.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go
do
right
we have
ahead.
another what witness here?
No, not that I'm aware of. No. Excuse me.
Yes, me.
Well, yeah.
It's like.
What's that?
One started, but.
I don't think we would conclude with you in the time period we
Was
left.
answering the question.
In what time period do you have? Is it, or we're at it, right? Or?
We're essentially at
it.
Madam Chair, if I could, and to the executive
Yeah.
director, do we have a sense of the witnesses on behalf of each party so we can understand who may be called and the length of the next hearing or the continued hearing?
These two.
Well, Nelson Embry, Scott Schweitzer, Mr. Stewart himself.
Okay, so you have three witnesses remaining?
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
potentially Steve Caraway, but maybe not. It's gonna be based on where we're at.
Okay, so we have three plus potentially Mr. Caraway and, on your behalf.
Myself and Steve Caraway, I think, are the only, and then whoever across.
So you're calling Caraway regardless?
Yes.
Okay.
Our goal would be to conclude the hearing at the next session. So if everyone could keep that in mind and be thorough, but at the same time brief, that would be appreciated.
Could the commission give us kind of a roadmap, what our time hack is at that time? Because I mean,
Well, I've been exchanging emails. You indicated the next meeting doesn't work for you. Is that correct or what?
That would be
August
the
29th, I
29th.
have 3 other court hearings scheduled at the same time. So that date does not work. I'm saying like today, we didn't know whether we had 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours. I mean, our expectation was we were going to finish today. I mean, we can go till 5 or 6. I understand if the commission can't, but it would help us to know we have a 2:30 time hack.
But can we, if the other people aren't here to testify?
What's that?
Well,
Well, clearly, if
witnesses.
members are leaving, I'm not saying go forward,
Yeah.
I'm saying if we knew yesterday that we were going to be done at 2:30, I wouldn't have
Council,
carried here.
yeah, we'll commit to this. Once we determine the date for the next hearing, we'll be able to determine in advance the conclusion date because we'll address that among ourselves and we can get back to you. Let's shoot for a time that we can go until 4 or 5 o'clock. We would ask from a reciprocal perspective that you guys be prepared to try to complete it within that time period. But once we determine the date, I think we can commit to the time period and we'll make sure everybody's on the same page.
We want to try to confirm a date.
The next two after this are September 12th and September 26th.
Can you commit to either of those dates?
What are those two again?
September 12th and
26th.
September 26th are the next 2 dates after August 29th.
Any hearings? I can do either.
I can only do the 26th. Another hearing on that.
Is this September 26th?
Mhm.
You're mentioning? Yeah.
So he just said he
26 is
he said he can't do the
not-
12th.
I can do the 26th. I can't do the 12th.
We've got two commissioners, two commissioners, can't, yeah.
So then we're October 17, October 31.
Sorry.
Halloween.
Commissioners, what they're
Welcome and
back
costumes.
at that point, you're asking me to come back 3 weeks before my election. Be held for a hearing that's 4 years old. If we can't do it in September, right, to push it into November, because I mean, I can't spend the last 2 weeks of a campaign reelection here.
And I understand and respect that. I'm merely giving what the next dates of the commission are after that. All right, let's just conclude and we'll work on getting you a date.
Thank you to those who have presented today. We will conclude, or we will recess this hearing until we come up with another date that everyone is available for. Thank you to the witnesses and Mr. Richter, anything else before?
Nope. Not what I have.
Yes, please make a motion, please. Thank you. Second. It's been moved and properly second to conclude today's meeting. Thank you. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It's been approved by a vote of 7-0. Very much.
I'm like, I know. It's almost. complete. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah,
Yeah. The problem is we've set long hearings, we've set short hearings, and it seems like
They don't.
you run up against it anyway, and then there's more days assigned, so even when you try to be flexible.
This one, we. Like, this should be getting, oh, yeah, I gotta run, guys.
You know, all of them.
Reason the next thing. Wait, the next one, wait, no, I won't see you. So that's how I told her. How do they do that?
Yeah.
I'm already not.
Oh, I'll-
Yeah, we'll collect all. If you can figure out.
Yeah, that way I make sure to match up everyone, because if you make your own notes and everything, that way you get thrown notes back. I mean, it's not gonna go right.
Could give them back. That's good.
You don't want to carry.
They're on the plan.
If you don't want to carry like all the exhibits along with you, just put your name on them and leave it here.
Yeah, nice to meet you. See you again. Don't forget your bot. Thank you.
I didn't meet you.